The envelope cracked open between my fingers, the sound sharp as a bone breaking. My father's fountain pen signature bled across the bottom of the page. It was the same pen he'd used to sign my Harvard acceptance letter 4 years ago. The restaurant's chandelier light caught my mother's diamond tennis bracelet as she leaned back, satisfied. My sister Olivia slid her phone discreetly beneath the tablecloth, but I caught the red recording light still glowing. "We think this is best for everyone," my mother said, voice honey-coated with rehearsed concern. "A clean break." I stared at the disownment letter. Beneath the legal jargon and cold formality, 3 signatures formed a perfect row. My father Warren's authoritative strokes, my mother Patricia's elegant curves, and Olivia's hasty scrawl. The air conditioning vent above our table blew directly onto my skin, raising goosebumps along my arms. The French restaurant's ambient noise faded to a distant hum as blood rushed to my ears. I watched my hands, steady, unshaking, carefully fold the heavy paper in half, then quarters. "Is there anything you'd like to say?" My father checked his watch. Patek Philippe, limited edition. It was the same dismissive gesture he'd used at every parent-teacher conference he'd bothered to attend. The waiter approached, champagne bottle in hand. "To celebrate the graduate," he announced, unaware he'd walked into an execution. My family's eyes fixed on me, anticipating tears, outrage, the emotional display they'd come to film, a final performance from the family disappointment. I slipped the folded letter into my blazer pocket and reached for my own envelope. "My name is Rebecca. I'm 22 and a data scientist. This is the story of how I turned their silence into my loudest statement." The Bennett family legacy spanned 3 generations of investment banking excellence. Our Chicago lakefront mansion featured in architectural magazines. Our name appeared on university buildings and hospital wings. When people mentioned old money in hushed, reverent tones, they meant families like ours. I was supposed to follow tradition. Wharton undergraduate, then Harvard Business School, then the family firm. Instead, I developed an obsession with algorithms and efficiency metrics. By sophomore year, I'd switched majors from finance to data science, watching my father's expression harden with each academic update I shared. "Numbers are numbers," I tried explaining once. "I'm just using them differently." "Family tradition isn't a math problem you can optimize," he replied, turning back to the quarterly report spread across his mahogany desk. After that conversation, my parents' communication strategy shifted. Questions about my classes stopped. Dinner invitations dwindled. Family photos no longer required my presence. Even holiday gatherings became optional. "We understand if you're too busy with your projects," my mother would text, the passive-aggressive work done. Olivia, 2 years older and already a rising star at Bennett Financial, became their proxy. She'd call occasionally, her voice carefully neutral as she reported family news and reminded me of expectations. "Dad mentioned the junior analyst position again," she said during one such call. "It's still yours if you want it." "I'm building something different," I replied. "Different isn't always better, Becca." Her sigh carried the weight of all their disappointment. Sometimes different is just difficult. I'd already learned to translate Bennett speak. Different meant defiant. Difficult meant disappointing. I was becoming both. My coffee shop job near campus covered rent for a small apartment I shared with 2 engineering students. The constant espresso machine hiss and customer chatter became the soundtrack to my life. It was a sharp contrast to our family home's cathedral-like silence. Between shifts, I coded at a corner table, building what started as a class project and evolved into something more. Root Logic began as an algorithm to optimize coffee bean delivery schedules. Small shipments, minimal storage space, unpredictable demand. These were the coffee shop owner's constant headaches. My solution reduced waste by 23% during the first test month. Dr. Sanchez, my advanced analytics professor, noticed the project during midterm reviews. "This has potential beyond coffee beans," she said, tapping her pen against my laptop screen. "Supply chain optimization at this scale could transform small business logistics." She connected me with the university's startup incubator. By winter break, Root Logic had expanded to 3 test clients. By spring, we had seed funding and a small team. Just me, Zach handling UX design, and Kayla managing client relationships. I didn't tell my family. Their questions would come with conditions, their interest with expectations. Besides, they'd stopped asking about my life months ago. The morning we closed our first major investment round, $2.4 million from Vertex Ventures, I stood in my tiny kitchen staring at my phone. The family group chat showed my sister's law firm promotion announcement with a string of champagne emoji reactions. My thumb hovered over the screen, the urge to share my own news nearly overwhelming. Instead, I put the phone down and went to work. We moved into real office space that summer. Nothing fancy, just an open-concept loft with exposed brick and questionable heating. The team expanded to 12 people. Kayla hung a whiteboard by my desk with our client acquisition targets. Halfway through the list was Bennett Financial. I erased it during a late-night coding session. Some connections weren't worth making. Then James Mitchell from North Star Logistics reached out. His company needed exactly what we'd built, and they were willing to pay for it, not just as clients, but as acquirers. The initial offer came in at $5.8 million. After 2 weeks of negotiation, we settled on $7.2 million, with guaranteed positions for the entire team, including a director role for me. The contracts were signed on Tuesday. My graduation ceremony was scheduled for Saturday. The family dinner invitation arrived Wednesday morning. My mother's perfectly curated text suggesting Maison Lumière, where the Bennett family celebrated all significant milestones. My father selected the wines in advance. My mother arranged the flowers. Olivia documented everything for their carefully curated social presents. I accepted with a simple, "I'll be there." The night before the dinner, I sat in my apartment surrounded by documents. The acquisition paperwork, press releases scheduled for Monday morning, my graduation certificate in its leather portfolio. 4 years of systematic effort laid out in black and white. Proof, all of it. Not of success, but of existence, of choices made and paths taken. I slid everything into a sleek leather portfolio, the kind my father would approve of, at least aesthetically. I fell asleep listening to Chicago traffic 17 floors below. The next evening, I arrived at Maison Lumière precisely on time. The maitre d' hesitated when I gave my name. "The Bennett reservation," I clarified. He checked his tablet again. "I have the Bennett family listed as 4 guests, but only 3 have arrived." Of course, my name wasn't on the reservation. I was the subject of the dinner, not a participant. "I'm the 4th, I said, maintaining eye contact until he nodded. The maitre d' led me through the dimly lit restaurant. Between tables of Chicago's elite discussing market trends and vacation properties, I spotted my family immediately. They were arranged like a perfect tableau, waiting for their subject to arrive. The table was positioned perfectly, central enough to be seen, private enough for conversation. My mother had already arranged herself like a magazine cover, her silk blouse exactly matching the dinner napkins. My father studied the wine list with unnecessary concentration. Olivia angled her chair for optimal social media documentation. "Darling!" My mother air-kissed near both my cheeks. "The guest of honor arrives." I accepted the performance, taking my designated seat. The waiter appeared with champagne, pouring 4 flutes with practiced precision. My father raised his glass. "To endings and beginnings." The toast completed, my mother reached into her designer handbag and withdrew a cream-colored envelope, placing it beside my bread plate. The paper was heavyweight, the kind used for legal documents and permanent records. "We've given this considerable thought," she began, her therapy-practiced voice hitting the perfect note of compassionate detachment. "And we believe this arrangement will benefit everyone." I opened the envelope slowly, though I already knew what it contained. The disownment document was legally unnecessary. I was an adult with my own finances, but it was symbolically significant. The Bennett family formally severing ties with its wayward daughter, written in contractual language my father's lawyers had undoubtedly scrutinized. My mother continued her prepared speech about family legacies and different paths, while I read each word carefully. The document acknowledged my choice to pursue alternative career options outside the family business and formally released me from obligations and expectations associated with the Bennett. Translation. I was being erased. Olivia's phone captured every moment. My face as I read, my hands as they held the paper, my silence as I processed their rejection. The perfect dramatic content for their carefully curated narrative. I refolded the document along crisp lines and tucked it into my jacket pocket. "Is that all?" I asked. My father's eyebrows rose slightly. It was the most emotion he typically displayed in public. "You're taking this well." "What did you expect? Tears? A scene?" I kept my voice level, matching his practiced boardroom tone. "We thought you might have questions," my mother said, her planned script derailing. "I think everything is perfectly clear." I reached for my portfolio and placed it on the table. "As it happens, I have something for you as well." I withdrew the North Star acquisition documents, slides from our final presentation, and the press release scheduled for Monday morning. I arranged them in a neat row between the bread baskets and water glasses. "What's this?" My father's attention sharpened, financial documents triggering his professional interest despite himself. "My alternative career option." I tapped the North Star logo embossed at the top of the page. "They acquired my company 2 days ago. The announcement goes public on Monday." "Your company?" Olivia lowered her phone, momentarily forgetting to record. "Root Logic, the supply chain optimization system I've been building for the past 3 years." I met my father's gaze directly. "The one you never asked about." He picked up the acquisition summary, scanning the numbers with practiced efficiency. His expression shifted as he reached the final figure, $7.2 million. "This is legitimate." He couldn't quite keep the surprise from his voice. "Completely. I'm joining as Director of Implementation Strategy next month." I kept my tone conversational, as though discussing the weather. "We've already secured contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies." "Why didn't you tell us?" My mother's perfect composure cracked slightly. "You stopped asking." The simple truth hung in the air between us. Olivia reached for the press release, skimming the content. "This mentions your development of the core algorithm while working as a barista." "The coffee shop by campus. I worked there for 3 years." "We thought that was just..." My mother trailed off. "Just what? A hobby? A phase? A failure?" I kept my voice level despite the heat rising in my chest. "You never actually asked." My father was still processing the acquisition documents, his financial mind automatically calculating valuations and terms. I could see the exact moment he registered my ownership percentage. "This is quite an accomplishment," he said finally, CEO voice activated. "Perhaps we've been too hasty in our assessment." I almost laughed at the transparency of it. One multi-million-dollar exit, and suddenly I was worthy of consideration. "The document is already signed," I reminded him, nodding toward my pocket where their disownment letter rested, "by all of you." "Documents can be amended," he countered smoothly. "Some things shouldn't be." I gathered my materials and returned them to my portfolio. "You've made your position clear. I'm respecting your decision." "Rebecca," my mother reached for my hand, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. "We're your family." "No," I said gently, pulling away from her grasp. "You're the Bennetts. I'm just Rebecca now. You've made sure of that." I stood, portfolio tucked under my arm. Olivia's phone remained dark in her hand, the story no longer following their expected script. "Your arrangement, as you called it, works perfectly for me," I said, straightening my blazer. "You wanted a clean break. You've got one." I walked through the restaurant without looking back, each step lighter than the last. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors and stepped into the warm evening air outside. Chicago's summer evening embraced me. Warm air, taxi horns, the distant rumble of the L train. Real life, messy and loud and wonderfully unpredictable. My phone vibrated with a text from Zach. "Team celebration at Murphy's in an hour. You coming?" I smiled and typed back, "On my way." The team had planned this celebration for weeks, anticipating our acquisition closing. Murphy's was our unofficial headquarters. It was the Irish pub 3 blocks from our office where we'd celebrated every milestone. I flagged down a taxi and gave the driver the address. 20 minutes later, I walked into Murphy's to the sound of cheers from my team, the people who'd actually seen what I was building. The disownment letter remained in my pocket, a weight I'd carried long before they'd put it on paper. But now it was just paper. Their signatures, their decision, their loss. Within a month, I'd complete the process of legally changing my surname, making the separation as official as they'd wanted. They thought they were writing my ending. They didn't realize they had just freed me to begin. If you've ever been underestimated or overlooked by the people who should have believed in you first, remember, success isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right. Your silence can become your strength when you're building something that will eventually speak for itself. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles, zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one. Blood trickled at my hairline as my mother's words rang in my ears. Maybe if your mother listened like Quinn does, she wouldn't get punished. Punished? The word hung in the air of my small duplex living room. My daughter's scream pierced through the ringing in my ears. Her face, terror frozen in those 8-year-old eyes, reflected everything I had spent years trying to protect her from. My father's fingers still dug into my arm where he had shoved me into the bookshelf. My mother's palm print burned across my cheek. The family photos on the wall, the ones where we all pretended to be normal, now seemed to mock me as I watched my daughter trembling in the corner, witnessing her mother injured on the floor of her own home. All because I wouldn't pay my sister's rent. Again. My name is Nora. I'm 34 and a single mother. This is the story of how I became the landlord of my own life, and theirs. I lived modestly in a rented duplex with my daughter, Sophie. Everything I did for her. School lunches, clothes, dance classes. She was quiet and thoughtful, always watching. And now she was watching my parents assault me because I had finally said no. It had started small. My parents would say things like, "Quinn's struggling. Help her out a little." And I did. First with tuition, then car repairs, then just until she gets back on her feet. But my younger sister never stood on her own, and my parents never stopped asking. They had my address and phone number from when I'd invited them to Sophie's birthday party last year, despite my better judgment. The text had arrived earlier that day. "Rent is due. Help your sister out. We raised you better than this." I had ignored it. Sophie's dental procedure had drained my extra funds, and I couldn't afford to bail Quinn out again. 2 hours later, they showed up. No warning. Mom banging on the door like a debt collector, Dad standing behind with that smug look he wore when preparing to lecture me. "Why aren't you answering our messages?" Mom had snapped as I opened the door. "I've already told you, I can't pay Quinn's rent this month." "Oh, so your daughter's dentist bill is more important than your sister's roof," Dad said sarcastically, stepping inside without being invited. "I'm not responsible for her lifestyle," I said, standing my ground. "She had options. She chose not to work. Don't put that on me." That's when things escalated. Mom threw her purse across the room, screaming, "Ungrateful brat, you think you're better than us now?" Before I could process it, she slapped me hard. Dad grabbed my arm and shoved me toward the wall. I stumbled, hitting the corner of the bookshelf. And now, here I was, blood dripping onto the hardwood floor, while my parents sat on my couch like they owned the place. "We'll leave when you transfer the money," Dad barked. "Until then, we'll stay and make sure you don't waste any more of it." My daughter's eyes never left mine as I slowly stood, legs shaking beneath me. Something in me cracked, then shifted, like tectonic plates realigning after centuries of pressure. "Mom," Sophie whispered later that night, curled against me in our locked bedroom, "why do Grandma and Grandpa hate you?" I didn't answer. I couldn't find words to explain the twisted version of family I'd accepted for so long, but as I watched her finally drift into restless sleep, my mind clicked through possibilities like a combination lock finally aligning. The next morning, I drove Sophie to school with sunglasses covering my swollen eye. Then I drove straight to the courthouse. What my parents didn't know, what no one knew, was that for the past 2 years, I had been quietly investing every spare dollar from my steady IT job. Every raise, bonus, and freelance gig went into a fund that had quietly purchased the very house my parents lived in. My childhood home, a foreclosure, bought through an LLC I'd established with the help of a financial advisor who specialized in real estate investments. They knew nothing about my involvement. If they wanted to remind me what family meant, I was about to redefine it on my terms. The bruises on my arms and the fresh medical report were enough to push through an emergency restraining order. They hurt me in front of my daughter because I wouldn't pay for my sister's rent, I told the officer. He didn't even blink. You did the right thing. Let us handle the rest. Next, I reached out to the property manager of my childhood home. I had her contact information saved in my phone from when I'd first purchased the property. Are they behind on rent again? I asked, already knowing the answer from the monthly reports she sent. 3 months, she replied. We were about to send them a notice. Don't, I said, let me. That night, my parents had the audacity to text me. Dad, you've embarrassed this family. Mom, Sophie needs to learn who the real villains are. Dad, you'll regret choosing outsiders over your own sister. They didn't know I had already sent a certified letter with a 30-day eviction notice. They didn't know what was coming next, but Quinn did. A few days later, I bumped into her at the grocery store near my office. She looked at me like I was dirt. You're still playing the victim? She scoffed, tossing expensive hair products into her cart. You mean the victim of your freeloading? I said calmly. I'm not playing anything. You're about to watch the stage crumble beneath your spotlight. She blinked, confused. What are you talking about? I didn't answer. Some people only learn by falling. The eviction letter arrived at my parents' house the next morning. Mom called me, screaming through the phone. How could you do this to us? When I answered without emotion. The same way you could hit your daughter in front of her child. Easy. Where are we supposed to go? She cried. That's your problem, I said. But if you need help, maybe Quinn can pay your rent. There was silence on the other end. Then she hung up. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The next week was chaos. My parents contacted mutual relatives, painting me as cruel, ungrateful, mentally unstable. I stayed quiet. I didn't need to defend myself. Instead, I picked Sophie up from school with a calm heart and told her, "We're moving." Her eyes lit up. Really? Where? To a place that's truly ours. I had closed on a small house a few streets over. Nothing fancy, but it had a fenced yard, Sophie's favorite lavender bushes in front, and peace. Real peace. I'd been saving for this down payment separately from the investment fund, knowing I'd need a fresh start for both of us. Meanwhile, my parents were frantically trying to find housing with Quinn, who, according to my cousin, who still spoke to them, was now too busy to help. Poetic. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt healed. But the final confrontation was still to come. Exactly 30 days from the date on the eviction notice, I stood across the street from the house I once called home. The property manager had confirmed they were still there that morning and would need to be out by noon. The front yard was cluttered with plastic bags, half-broken furniture, and my mother's prized patio swing, now rusted at the base. My father paced like a caged animal. Quinn wasn't there. According to my cousin's text from that morning, she had flown to Miami to clear her head. I crossed the street slowly, Sophie holding my hand, her tiny fingers squeezing mine tighter the closer we got. She had a backpack over her shoulder with her sketch pad sticking out. I hadn't planned for her to witness this, but she asked to come. She said, "I want to see what it looks like when people get what they deserve." The moment they saw me, my mother rushed forward. "Nora, you can't be serious," she snapped, dragging a suitcase behind her. "We're your family. You're throwing us out like garbage." I looked at her without flinching. "I was garbage to you when I needed protection. When Sophie needed protection, you hit me like I was nothing. And now you want sympathy?" My dad stomped toward us. "You think money gives you power? You've become arrogant. You're just a tenant who bought herself a crown." "No," I said. "I became the landlord of my own life and yours." He reached for my arm, but this time I didn't freeze. I didn't cower. "Touch me again," I said sharply, "and the police will arrive faster than your next lie." He stopped. Something in his eyes shifted. Maybe for the first time, he realized he couldn't scare me anymore. Sophie stepped slightly forward. "You shouldn't have hurt my mom," she said, voice quiet but clear. "You lied about love." My mom's lip trembled, but she didn't apologize. She never did. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "No," I said. "I regretted letting you stay this long." They stood there, two people stripped of control, their pride scattered in the driveway. They had always held power over me through guilt, silence, and fear. But today, the roles reversed, and it felt like breathing for the first time. I turned to Sophie. "Let's go." We walked back toward our car, not looking back. Later that evening, I poured us both tea, hers chamomile, mine green. She sat across from me at the new kitchen table in our tiny home. The lavender bushes outside caught the golden hour light, swaying like they'd been waiting for us. "Do you feel better now?" Sophie asked, legs swinging under the chair. I thought for a moment. "I feel clean," I said, like something heavy was washed away. She nodded like she understood. I had started therapy. Sophie had started painting. We were slowly rebuilding not just a home, but a self-worth that had been stolen, splintered, and mocked. A few weeks later, I got a message from a distant cousin. My parents were now staying in a one-bedroom apartment above a closed nail salon. Quinn had ghosted them, leaving nothing but an angry voicemail and a drained Venmo account. No one was rushing to save them. They had burned every bridge. I never replied. Instead, I posted a picture of Sophie holding her latest painting, a small house with two stick figures and the sun smiling overhead. The caption read, "Period. We don't live in fear anymore." And we didn't. Sophie's father had left before she was born, and I had finalized the full termination of his parental rights years ago when he showed no interest in being part of her life. It was just the two of us now, and that was more than enough. As for my parents and Quinn, I heard through mutual friends that they eventually moved to a smaller town 3 hours away. My father found work as a night security guard, and my mother cleaned houses, the very thing she used to mock me for doing to pay my way through college. Quinn apparently found someone new to fund her lifestyle. I wished them nothing, neither good nor bad. They simply didn't exist in our world anymore. Sometimes Sophie asks about them, and I tell her the truth. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's who chooses to love you right. 6 months after the eviction, the final paperwork arrived. The divorce from my old life was complete. I sold my parents' house, invested the money, and finally changed our last name. We weren't running anymore. We were standing, firmly planted in a life we had chosen. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles, zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one. The words, "You're no longer our daughter," hit me like ice water as I stood in our family living room, still holding the acceptance letter to graduate school that I'd been so excited to share. My mother's face was stone cold, my father's arms crossed like a fortress wall. The scholarship letter, full ride to study environmental law, suddenly felt weightless in my trembling hands. My name is Rachel. I'm 23, and this is the story of how I discovered my true worth when my family tried to erase it. The living room where I'd opened Christmas presents, where I'd studied for the LSAT, where I'd celebrated getting into law school just 3 months earlier, suddenly felt like a courtroom where I'd already been convicted. The reason? I'd chosen environmental law over corporate law. I'd chosen a path that didn't fit their vision of prestige and profit. "Pack your things," my father said, his voice carrying that executive tone that had intimidated business rivals for decades. "If you won't represent the family interests, you can't live under our roof." My younger brother Marcus shifted uncomfortably on the couch, his eyes darting between me and our parents. My sister Victoria examined her manicure, seemingly bored by the drama unfolding. Neither said a word, as I was essentially excommunicated from the family that had raised me to believe love came with conditions. That night, I moved into a studio apartment across town, my belongings fitting into my old Honda Civic in just 2 trips. I had saved enough from my part-time job at the legal clinic to cover the security deposit and first month's rent. The silence from my family was deafening. No calls, no texts, nothing. For 3 weeks, I lived in that strange bubble of grief and newfound independence, working at a legal aid clinic during the day and studying at night. Then everything changed. My phone rang at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. The caller ID showed our family attorney's number, something that had never happened before. When I answered, his voice was urgent, almost panicked. "Rachel, I need you to come to my office first thing tomorrow morning. There's been a development with your grandfather's estate that requires immediate attention." My grandfather, my mother's father, had died 2 years earlier. I'd been told the estate was settled, everything distributed. What could possibly require my attention now? The next morning at 9 a.m., sitting across from Mr. Patterson in his mahogany-paneled office, I learned the truth that would change everything. The documents he spread across his desk revealed a secret my parents had kept hidden. My grandfather had established a massive trust fund specifically in my name, triggered to activate when I turned 23. "Your grandfather was very specific," Mr. Patterson explained, his glasses reflecting the morning light. "The trust was designed to support your education and early career, particularly if you chose to pursue public interest law. He believed you had the character to use wealth responsibly for social good." The amount made my head spin. $2.8 million plus the deed to his lake house and a portfolio of environmentally responsible investments. But here's where it got interesting, and where my parents' calculation had backfired spectacularly. The trust contained a clause that any attempt by family members to coerce or manipulate my career choices would result in additional penalties against the main family estate. My grandfather, it seemed, had anticipated exactly what my parents had done. "There's more," Mr. Patterson continued, pulling out another folder. "Your parents have been using power of attorney to manage certain aspects of your grandfather's remaining assets. But with this trust activating and given their recent actions toward you, there are some serious legal complications." As he explained the details, I realized my parents hadn't just disowned me. They'd unknowingly triggered a legal chain reaction that put their own financial stability at risk. My grandfather had built protections into his estate that would punish anyone who tried to control or exclude me from the family. I walked out of that office in a daze, my mind reeling with possibilities. For 3 weeks, I'd been the rejected daughter, scraping together rent money and eating ramen noodles. Now, I was financially independent with more resources than I'd ever imagined. But more than the money, I had something else: leverage. That evening, I sat in my tiny studio apartment, looking at the bank statements Mr. Patterson had given me. My phone had been buzzing all day. Missed calls from my mother, my father, even Marcus. They knew. Somehow, they'd found out about the trust. As I later learned, Mr. Patterson was legally required to notify all parties affected by the estate complications, including my parents, as holders of the power of attorney, which he did immediately after our meeting. I didn't call them back. Instead, I made a different call, to the admissions office at Stanford, where I'd been accepted to their environmental law program, but had deferred due to family circumstances. With my grandfather's trust fund, I could now afford not just tuition, but the freedom to pursue exactly the career path my parents had rejected. 3 days later, on Friday afternoon, my mother finally appeared at my apartment door. I saw her through the peephole. Designer clothes, perfect hair, but something desperate in her posture. When I opened the door, she looked smaller than I remembered. "Rachel, sweetheart," she said, trying to smile, "we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding." I leaned against the door frame, not inviting her in. "What kind of misunderstanding?" "About your career choice, about the things we said. We were just concerned about your future security." "Concerned enough to disown me?" Her composure cracked slightly. "We never meant it permanently. Families have disagreements, but right now there are some legal matters involving your grandfather's estate that need your signature." And there it was. the real reason for her visit. Not love, not reconciliation, but paperwork that required my cooperation. I see, I said quietly. So when you told me I was no longer your daughter, that was just a temporary business decision. She flinched. Rachel, please. This is complicated. Your father's business partners are asking questions about the estate. If we don't resolve this quickly, it could affect everyone. I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time in our relationship, I held the cards. My mother, who had never asked for anything, who had always given orders, was standing at my door, asking for help. I'll think about it, I said, and gently closed the door. Over the following week, the calls intensified. My father left voicemails explaining the financial complications in increasingly urgent tones. Marcus texted me asking if we could meet for coffee. Even Victoria, who hadn't spoken to me since the disowning, sent a message suggesting we needed to work together as a family. Through Mr. Patterson, whom I called to get clarity on the situation, I learned more about my parents' situation. My grandfather's estate had been more complex than they'd realized, with multiple conditions and triggers built in. My disowning had activated several penalty clauses that were now threatening their access to funds they'd been counting on for my father's business expansion. The irony was perfect. By rejecting me for choosing public service over profit, they'd triggered the very consequences my grandfather had designed to protect that choice. 2 weeks later, in early May, I agreed to meet with them, but on my terms, in Mr. Patterson's office, with full legal representation. The family that had banished me from our living room was now sitting across a conference table, needing my signature to save their financial future. My father looked older, stress lines etched around his eyes. My mother kept glancing at her phone as if expecting urgent news. Marcus and Victoria flanked them like nervous bodyguards. Rachel, my father began, his executive voice now tinged with something I'd never heard before, vulnerability. We made mistakes. We let our concern for your future cloud our judgment. I sat back in the leather chair, Mr. Patterson beside me, and waited. The family business is facing some challenges, he continued, challenges that could be resolved if we can properly execute your grandfather's estate plan, but that requires your cooperation. My mother leaned forward. We're prepared to support your law school plans. Stanford is an excellent choice. We could even help with living expenses. The offer that would have meant everything to me a month ago now felt hollow. They weren't offering support. They were offering payment for my signature. I appreciate the offer, I said quietly, but I've already arranged my own financing. The room fell silent. Victoria's perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment. Marcus looked genuinely confused. Your own financing? My father asked. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. Perhaps we should explain the full scope of the trust fund to everyone. As he detailed my grandfather's provisions, the $2.8 million, the investments, the lake house, and most importantly, the protective clauses that penalized anyone who tried to control my career, I watched my parents' faces change. Shock, recognition, and finally something that looked almost like fear. So you see, I said when Mr. Patterson finished, I don't need your support for law school. I don't need your permission to pursue environmental law, and I certainly don't need your approval to live my life. My father's face reddened. You can't just walk away from family obligations. Family obligations? I stood up, feeling steady and strong. Like the obligation to love your children unconditionally? Like the obligation to support their dreams even when they don't match your own? Those family obligations? My mother's eyes filled with tears. Whether real or calculated, I couldn't tell. Rachel, please, we can work this out. We're still family. I gathered my papers and looked at each of them. These people who had shaped my childhood, who had given me life and love, and then tried to take it away when I didn't conform to their expectations. You're right, I said. We are still family. But family doesn't end when someone chooses a different path. You ended it when you decided love came with conditions. You ended it when you threw away your daughter rather than trust her judgment. I paused at the door, turning back one last time. I'll sign the documents that properly execute grandfather's estate. But not because you need me to, because it's the right thing to do, and because grandfather trusted me to make the right choices. That's the difference between conditional love and unconditional character. 6 months later, by September, I was settled into my first semester at Stanford, living in a beautiful apartment near campus that I could afford thanks to my grandfather's foresight and love. I had signed all the necessary paperwork before leaving for California, resolving the legal complications with my parents' business. The lake house had become my retreat, where I studied environmental law surrounded by the natural beauty I was learning to protect. My parents' business survived the estate complications, though it required some downsizing and restructuring. The legal penalties were eventually resolved through the proper execution of the estate documents, allowing them to retain access to the funds they needed, albeit with the clear understanding that any future attempts to control my choices would trigger even more severe consequences. They sent me a graduation gift when I finished my first year, a card with a check I didn't need, and a note that said, "We're proud of you," that I'd waited my whole life to hear. But pride offered after rejection isn't the same as love offered freely. I kept the note, but I'd already learned something more valuable, that the most important approval I needed was my own. Our relationship today exists in a careful balance. We maintain cordial contact during holidays and major milestones, but the deep trust and unconditional love that should define a family was broken that day in our living room. They learned to respect my independence, and I learned to live without their approval. Marcus and I occasionally meet for coffee when I'm in town, though he still struggles with divided loyalties between his parents and his conscience. Victoria remains distant, having never fully understood why I couldn't just conform to keep the family peace. The rejection that was meant to control me had instead set me free. The family that tried to shrink my dreams had unknowingly provided me with the means to expand them beyond anything they could have imagined, and the grandfather who had believed in me long before I believed in myself had given me something more valuable than money. The knowledge that someone had seen my true worth and protected it, even from those who should have cherished it most. Today, I'm working on cases that matter, fighting for the environment my grandfather loved, living a life he would have been proud of. And sometimes, when I'm at the lake house watching the sunset over water that belongs to me, I whisper thank you to the man who knew that true family doesn't abandon you when you disappoint them. True family gives you the tools to disappoint them and still succeed. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles. Zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.